There was a time in my life when I thought I had it all figured out. Growing up, I was taught that success was the only thing that mattered. Work hard, push your limits, and everything else will follow. I believed that. And for years, I poured every ounce of my energy into climbing the corporate ladder, into making something of myself. My name was Mike Thompson, a guy who had a vision of what life was supposed to be, make a mark in the world, prove my worth, and maybe, just maybe, find a woman who would be by my side while I did all of that. My belief bubble was simple. Focus on your career, make your dreams come true, and the rest will come later. After all, who wouldn't want to be successful? Who wouldn't want to be known as the guy who made it? The guy who has everything? I figured once I hit my milestones, everything else would just fall into place. Family, love, happiness. I didn't realize how far off I was. Because, in the process of chasing my dreams, I ignored the one thing that was right in front of me: Sarah. You see, Sarah had been with me through all of it. She was there when I was working late, when I missed dinners, when I didn't show up to special occasions. She supported me. But there was a point when I started to notice something different. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in her eyes when I came home late, or a slight hesitation before she kissed me goodnight. It was as if something was missing. Something had changed, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but deep down, I convinced myself it was just a phase. She was fine. She understood. After all, it was all for us. Once I made it big, everything would be perfect. Right? At first, I thought the dream was working. My career was taking off. I bought the house, the car. I even had a team working under me. But no matter how successful I became, it always felt like something was missing. The more I climbed, the more I found myself alone at the top. Sarah wasn't quite the same anymore. It was like we were on different paths, and the distance between us was growing with every passing day. That's when it hit me. I was losing the one thing I truly needed. It wasn't the money or the titles, it was her. But I couldn't admit it. Not yet. The belief bubble I'd created had convinced me that success would bring me everything I wanted. But the truth? It was far more complicated than that. The tension between us was palpable, and as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose everything. My dreams, my career, none of it would mean anything if Sarah wasn't by my side. But was it too late? Had I already sacrificed the most important thing in my life for the pursuit of something I thought I needed? As I stood there, staring at the life I had built, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? And if I made a choice now to fix things, could I repair what had been broken? This question gnawed at me, and the answer? Well, that's where the real story begins. At some point, everything started to feel like a balancing act. I had my career, my dream, taking off, but I also had Sarah, my partner, who had been my rock for years. The dream that I'd been working for, the one I believed would bring me happiness, was actually starting to feel a little hollow. But how could I admit that? How could I confess that after all the sacrifices I'd made, the long hours at the office, the missed weekends, the dinners alone, I was now questioning whether it was all worth it? I thought I was doing everything right. In my mind, I was building a future, a solid foundation for us to enjoy. But what good was a mansion and a fancy car if I couldn't remember the last time we sat down together and shared a laugh? The truth hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I wasn't just losing Sarah. I was losing myself. My belief bubble, the one I had wrapped my life around, was starting to crack. But admitting it? That was too difficult. I had spent years convincing myself that career success would bring everything I needed, but now, standing at the top of the ladder, I felt more alone than ever. I remember the first time Sarah said it out loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation, but it was still hard to ignore. Mike, you've changed. You're not the same person anymore. She wasn't wrong. I had changed. But I didn't know how to fix it. She wasn't asking for a lot, just for me to be present. And yet I couldn't tear myself away from the dream. The dream that I'd spent so many years chasing. Don't you want to succeed? I asked, trying to justify it. I don't care about success if I don't have you, she responded. And that stopped me dead in my tracks. What kind of success was I really building if I was pushing away the one person who mattered most? Was it success if it was at the cost of my happiness? And even more, at the cost of Sarah's? We drifted apart slowly, like a boat sailing further from shore without us even realizing it. It wasn't about arguments or fights, it was the little things. Sarah stopped asking about my day. I stopped asking about hers. We no longer spent weekends together. I couldn't even remember the last time we had a conversation without distractions. I was busy. She was lonely. And the gulf between us was widening by the day. But I told myself it wasn't too late. I could fix it. I just needed a little more time. A little more success. Once I got to the next milestone, I promised myself I'd focus more on us. I'd come back to her. But deep down, I knew the truth. Could I really go back to how things were? Had I already given too much of myself to the pursuit of a dream? One night, I came home late, as usual, after a long day at the office. Sarah was sitting on the couch, looking at something on her phone, her face bathed in the soft glow of the screen. There was no anger. No frustration. Just a look of resignation. "Mike, I think we need to talk," she said softly. I felt my heart sink. I knew what was coming. We'd been tiptoeing around it for months, but now it was unavoidable. The moment I had been dreading. The moment when everything I had built might crumble. "I think it's time for us to go our separate ways," she said, barely above a whisper. It felt like the ground beneath me shifted. The dream I had spent so long chasing suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. I wasn't ready to hear it. But in my gut I knew she was right. It was too late. And as much as I hated to admit it, the hardest truth I had to face was this: I had already lost her. I sat there, stunned, as the weight of it all hit me. This wasn't just about Sarah wanting more from me. This was about me needing to face the fact that I had been chasing the wrong thing. Success was supposed to make me happy, but it hadn't. It hadn't made Sarah happy either. I realized then that I had been so obsessed with building a future I thought I wanted, that I had overlooked the most important part of life: relationships. Love. Companionship. The people who are with you through it all. The people who are the true foundation of any success. Without them, it all felt meaningless. The question lingered in my mind: had I already lost my chance to make things right? Was it too late for us? This was the crossroads. The choice. Stay the course, and risk losing everything, or let go of the dream I had worked so hard for, to salvage what mattered most: love. The question I had been running from for so long was finally in my face. Was I willing to lose everything I had gained, in order to win back the most important thing in my life? The story, for me, wasn't over. It had just begun. After that conversation with Sarah, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The world around me seemed to spin, but I was frozen in place, stuck in this overwhelming fog of shame. It wasn't just about losing Sarah. It was the realization that I had become a person I didn't even recognize. For so long, I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed that success would prove my worth, that building my career would somehow validate everything I had worked for. But now, as I sat there, alone in my apartment, all I could feel was emptiness. My self-esteem had taken a brutal hit. The very thing I had spent years building, the life I thought would bring me happiness, felt hollow. I'd always prided myself on being driven, determined, and successful. But now, with nothing but silence around me, I couldn't help but feel like a failure. Not just as a partner, but as a person. How had I let it all slip through my fingers? How had I let Sarah slip away? I started replaying everything in my mind, going over each moment, each missed opportunity. I remembered the late nights at the office when Sarah would text me, asking how my day was, and I'd reply with a quick busy, talk later before focusing back on the stack of paperwork in front of me. I remembered the quiet dinners, the conversations that never happened, the plans we made that never came to fruition. How could I have been so blind? I could have done better. I should have done better. But now, that nagging voice inside my head wouldn't stop. It wasn't just about Sarah, it was about who I had become. I had let the pursuit of success change me, turn me into someone who valued work more than love, status more than connection. I had become someone I wasn't proud of. And now, there was no one left to blame but myself. The worst part was looking in the mirror. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself, I didn't see the man I used to be. I saw a stranger. The man who had once been passionate about life, about love, now seemed distant, disenchanted. I had always been driven, but now that drive felt like a chain pulling me further away from the people I cared about. I would get up in the morning, go through the motions, but inside, I felt defeated. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to prove anymore. To my colleagues? To the world? Or was it to myself? What had all that effort really amounted to? Every day felt like a new lesson in failure. And the worst part? I couldn't seem to escape it. Without Sarah, I felt like I was adrift. The life I had built, the dream I had chased, it didn't matter anymore. I realized how little it had actually fulfilled me. I was left with this profound sense of loss, of not just her, but of my own self-worth. Who was I without her? Without the relationship we had? Without the connection I had once taken for granted? I'd always thought I could handle anything. But now, I couldn't even face the reality of what I had lost. My self-esteem had taken a blow that felt like a punch to the gut. I was no longer sure of myself, of my choices, of what was truly important. I couldn't help but think that maybe I wasn't worth fighting for, not just in Sarah's eyes, but in my own. I had put everything into something that, in the end, hadn't given me what I truly needed. I had sacrificed everything for success, and now it seemed like I had nothing left. But as I wallowed in that self-doubt, something inside me stirred. A tiny flicker of hope, maybe. I realized I couldn't keep going like this, trapped in my own guilt and shame. If I didn't make a change, I was going to lose even more than just Sarah. I'd lose myself entirely. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that I was fine. It was time to confront the truth of who I had become, and more importantly, to figure out who I wanted to be moving forward. I had to ask myself, could I rebuild my life? Could I find my way back to being someone I was proud of? And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fix things with Sarah. Maybe the most important thing I had to learn wasn't just about success. It was about relationships, about being present, about showing up for the people who matter. The question lingered in my mind, could I salvage my self-worth, my career, and my relationship with Sarah? Could I find a way back to the life I thought I had lost? And if I did, would it be enough to make it all right again? As I looked in the mirror one more time, I promised myself I would find out. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The hardest part wasn't just losing Sarah, it was the feeling of being torn apart from the inside. I had always thought that I could control my emotions, keep everything neatly compartmentalized. But now, every thought, every memory, felt like a knife twisting deeper inside me. I'd never imagined this kind of pain. It was like I was caught in a storm I couldn't escape. Some days I would wake up and just lie there, staring at the ceiling, dreading the thought of facing another day without her. My heart ached for what we had lost. The laughter, the shared moments, the quiet times that had once made everything feel right. Now it was all gone, and I was left with nothing but this heavy, suffocating emptiness. I would find myself staring at my phone, half expecting a message from Sarah, some sign that maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. But no messages came. It was as though I was invisible, like she had completely erased me from her life. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. The person who had once been my everything no longer wanted me. I tried to busy myself with work, but it felt pointless. The endless emails, the meetings, the deals, it all felt like background noise, a distraction from the reality of what I had done. Every time I passed the place we used to go, a wave of nostalgia would hit me like a punch to the gut. I could almost hear her voice, smell the perfume she used to wear, see the smile she'd give me when we walked hand in hand. It was like a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost. Some nights, I would sit in the dark, drowning in my own thoughts. I'd tell myself I was fine, that I would move on, that time would heal everything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The pain didn't go away. It was always there, lingering in the background, a constant ache in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had. I couldn't stop thinking about her. My mind would replay the last argument we had, the words that were said in anger, the things that could have been avoided, and the things I should have done differently. Every what if felt like a bullet to the heart. One night, after another failed attempt to distract myself, I picked up my phone. I opened the messaging app, staring at the empty text box where her name once appeared. I could feel the temptation, just one message, one plea for forgiveness. I was consumed with the desire to reach out, to hear her voice, to fix everything. But as I hovered over the keyboard, my fingers frozen, I realized how desperate I had become. Was I trying to fix things for her, or for myself? I wasn't sure anymore. In that moment, I realized I had become someone I didn't recognize, a person who had lost himself, who had let his own insecurities drive away the one person who truly mattered. I couldn't deny it any longer. I had hurt her in ways I couldn't take back. I had prioritized everything, my career, my image, my success, over the one thing that truly mattered, our relationship. I had built walls around myself, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing, but all I had done was push her away. Every day felt like a reminder of my failure. I couldn't help but feel like I had betrayed her trust, her love, and the future we had planned together. My heart felt broken, shattered into pieces, each one a reminder of my mistakes. I knew I couldn't fix everything overnight, but the truth hit me hard. I couldn't keep running from my emotions. I had to face the fact that I had hurt the person I loved, and no amount of work or success could ever undo that damage. For a while, I found it hard to get out of bed. The weight of the emotional turmoil felt like it was dragging me down. I could barely concentrate at work. Every task felt like a mountain to climb, every conversation felt shallow. The emptiness I felt was suffocating, and I realized that maybe it wasn't just the loss of Sarah that was so painful. It was the loss of my own identity, the person I used to be, the person I wanted to be. I started questioning everything. Was I too late? Had I ruined the chance to fix things with Sarah? And if so, was I capable of moving on, of healing from this heartbreak? Or was I destined to carry this pain with me forever? As the days dragged on, something started to shift inside me. Maybe it was the realization that I couldn't keep holding on to this heartache forever. Maybe it was the fact that I was still alive, still breathing, still able to make a choice. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I realized that healing didn't come from running away from my emotions or hiding from the pain. It came from facing it, feeling it, and learning from it. I had to stop pretending to be fine. I had to confront the fact that I was hurt, that I was broken, and that I was human. As the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder, could this heartbreak be the catalyst for change? Could it lead me to rediscover who I truly was, and could I rebuild something from the wreckage? And most importantly, would I ever have a chance to make things right with Sarah? I stood at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. On one hand, there was the possibility of working things out with Sarah, of trying again and repairing the damage I had caused. On the other, there was the reality of how much pain I had inflicted, how many walls I had built around myself, and how deeply I had hurt her. I couldn't deny that a part of me felt broken beyond repair. My actions had created a chasm between us that seemed impossible to bridge. The decision felt like a weight I couldn't shake off, a burden I carried with every breath. Was it even possible to fix what was broken? Could we rebuild a future together after everything that had happened? Or was it better to let go, to walk away and save ourselves from more pain? I was terrified. Terrified of being rejected by her. Terrified of having the door closed on the possibility of us ever being together again. What if I tried and she didn't feel the same? What if all the things I had done, everything I had failed to do, were too much for her to forgive? The fear of not being enough, of losing her for good, gnawed at me constantly. I had always prided myself on being strong, on being the one who could handle anything. But in that moment, I was a mess, vulnerable, uncertain, and unsure of who I was without her. The person who had once been so confident now questioned everything. But there was also a part of me that wondered if walking away was the right choice. Maybe it was better to protect myself from more heartache, to shield myself from the constant emotional roller coaster. Maybe I didn't need Sarah to be happy. After all, I had managed to get this far without her, right? I had my work, my achievements, my personal growth. Yet, every time I thought about leaving her behind, I couldn't escape the hollow feeling in my chest. It wasn't about whether I could survive without her, it was about whether I wanted to. Deep down, I knew I loved her. And that love wasn't something I could easily walk away from. I found myself replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for clues, signs that might tell me what I was supposed to do. I remembered the first time we met, the way she made me feel seen, understood, and loved in a way no one else had. I remembered the countless nights we spent talking about our future, our dreams, the life we were going to build together. But then I also remembered the arguments, the moments when we drifted apart, the times when I put my work first and left her feeling neglected. Could I truly expect her to forgive me for that? Could I believe in the possibility of redemption after everything I had done? Letting go felt impossible. I kept picturing her walking out of my life, and the thought made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the end of everything I had ever known about love. I couldn't imagine waking up every morning without Sarah by my side, without the comfort of knowing she was there. But I also couldn't ignore the fear that if I stayed, I would only cause more pain. For both of us, every time I thought I had made up my mind, I would be hit with a new wave of doubt. The truth was, I didn't know what the right answer was. I didn't know if staying would be enough to fix the damage I had done, or if leaving would just prolong the agony. I could feel the weight of change bearing down on me. It wasn't just a decision, it was a new chapter in my life. Whether I stayed with Sarah or not, my life was about to change forever. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Relationships never were. And yet, the idea of leaving her behind, of not trying to fix what was broken, felt like a form of failure I wasn't willing to accept. I had spent too long building walls around myself, too long hiding from my emotions. Maybe it was time to take the risk, to open up again, to show her who I really was and how much I still cared. There was a moment, one quiet evening, when the noise of the world seemed to fade away. I sat in the stillness of my apartment, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. And in that silence I realized something. I couldn't control everything. Life didn't work that way. Relationships were messy, complicated, and unpredictable. But one thing I could control was my willingness to fight for what mattered. The decision wasn't about being perfect. It was about taking a chance. A chance to make things right. A chance to show Sarah that I was willing to do whatever it took to prove my love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. Could I really make things right with Sarah? Could love be enough to heal the wounds I had caused? Was it possible for me to rebuild a future with her, or was I simply chasing a dream that was too broken to fix? I had been trying to figure things out on my own for so long, but the weight of it all finally became too much to bear. My mind was a constant whirlwind of doubt, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of making a huge mistake, one I might regret for the rest of my life. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could offer a fresh perspective, someone who wasn't caught up in the chaos of my emotions. That's when I turned to my friends and family, knowing that they would be the ones to tell me what I didn't want to hear, but what I needed to hear. David had always been the guy I could count on. The one who had seen me through thick and thin, who knew all my flaws and still called me a friend. I had no idea what to expect from him, but I was desperate. When I called him that night, I could hear the concern in his voice immediately. "Mike, man, what's going on? You sound off," he said. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten as I started to tell him everything. The arguments with Sarah, the feeling of losing control, the uncertainty that had settled deep inside me. I spilled it all out, each word tumbling out faster than I could process. David listened quietly, letting me vent without interruption. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. Look, Mike, I know you love Sarah. But you've got to stop hiding from the truth. If you want this to work, you've got to be real with yourself, and with her. You're not going to figure it out by sitting in your head, bro. Sometimes you need to open up to the people who care about you. Talk to her, don't just overthink it. Whatever happens, at least you'll know you gave it your all. It wasn't exactly the advice I had expected, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. David wasn't sugarcoating things, he was telling me to face my fears, to take action. It was time to stop running away from the tough conversations. After talking to David, I felt a bit lighter, but I knew I needed more insight. I called my mom next. If anyone could see through my confusion and help me figure out what was truly important, it was her. She'd always had a way of cutting through the noise and getting straight to the heart of the matter. Mike, I can hear it in your voice, she said. You're torn up. But let me tell you something. You can't keep walking around in circles, trying to please everyone. You have to think about what makes you happy, what makes you feel whole. Not just what your friends or anyone else thinks is right. And yes, you have to talk to Sarah. But you also have to be honest with yourself. You can't keep pushing down your own needs just to avoid confrontation. Her words hit me harder than I expected. My mom had always been pragmatic, and her advice wasn't about what I wanted to hear, it was about what I needed to hear. I had spent so much time focusing on keeping the peace and avoiding the hard truths. But in doing that, I had lost sight of my own happiness. Then, there was Sarah's family. I hadn't spoken to them much in recent weeks, but I knew I had to. If there was anyone who truly knew her heart and could shed light on our situation, it was them. It felt awkward, but I needed their input. I reached out to her brother, Jake, who had always been a good friend to me. We met for a drink, and after a few minutes of small talk, I got straight to it. I need your help, man, I admitted. I don't know what to do. I love Sarah, but things feel like they're falling apart. Do you think we can still fix this? Jake's eyes softened, and he leaned in, clearly invested in the conversation. Mike, I've watched you and Sarah go through a lot. But let me tell you this, she's just as confused as you are. You guys need to talk, and you need to listen to each other. I think she's afraid of losing you, just like you're afraid of losing her. But it's more than just a fight. It's about understanding each other, being vulnerable, and doing what's right for both of you. His words hit me harder than I expected, but they also gave me clarity. I realized that I wasn't the only one struggling. Sarah was likely feeling just as uncertain, just as afraid. We had both been playing it safe, afraid to take the next step, but that wasn't going to get us anywhere. In those conversations, I began to see a pattern. Everyone was telling me to open up, to stop running, to be brave. And with each word of support, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this decision. I had people who cared about me, who wanted to see me make the right choice. But more importantly, I had people who reminded me that the only way to move forward was to take a step, no matter how scary that step might be. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't make this decision in isolation. I needed support, I needed guidance, and most importantly, I needed to face my fears. Because without that, there would be no way forward. Would I find the courage to have the conversation with Sarah? Could her family and my friends help me navigate the complexity of my emotions and find a way to heal? Or was I simply delaying the inevitable? It wasn't an overnight change. I didn't wake up one morning with all the answers, feeling like I had everything figured out. But something in me began to shift. After all the conversations, all the advice, and all the inner turmoil, I realized that the most important thing I could do was take responsibility for my own happiness. It wasn't about blaming Sarah, or my friends, or anyone else. It was about taking a hard look at myself and figuring out what I needed to feel whole again. And that's when the healing started, when I stopped looking for external validation and started looking inward. The first step was giving myself space. I took a few days off from work to focus on myself. No distractions, no outside pressures, just me, alone with my thoughts. It was uncomfortable at first, but I knew it was necessary. I started exercising more regularly, not just to clear my head, but to reconnect with my body. Every workout, every run, every moment I spent taking care of my physical health, I felt a little more in control of my life. Something about working up a sweat helped me release the tension in my muscles, but more importantly, it helped clear my mind. The constant worry, the swirling doubts, little by little, they started to fade. I started to feel stronger, both physically and mentally. As I worked through the mental fog, I took a step back to reevaluate what I really valued in life. I had spent so many years chasing success, trying to prove something to myself and everyone around me. But now, I realized that my values had shifted. It wasn't about having more or being more, it was about feeling whole. I wanted peace of mind, genuine connection, and emotional honesty. I realized that healing wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It was about understanding who I was now and what I truly wanted in the future. The old Mike had been so caught up in pleasing others, but this version of me, this new version, was learning to please himself. One of the most important things I learned in those quiet days was self-compassion. For so long, I had been so hard on myself, judging myself for not having the perfect relationship or the ideal life. I had constantly compared myself to others, thinking I was falling short in every way. But now, I started to give myself grace. I started forgiving myself for the mistakes I had made, for the times I had been too proud to ask for help, for the moments when I had let fear hold me back. I wasn't perfect, and that was okay. As I began to heal, my perspective on Sarah started to shift as well. I wasn't seeing her through the lens of pain and disappointment anymore. I started to understand that, while we had our flaws, we also had shared dreams and memories that meant something. The healing process didn't mean that I had to forget everything we had been through. It meant that I was finally able to look at our relationship with clearer eyes. I didn't have all the answers about what would happen next, but I could finally see that the love we had wasn't something that could just be erased. It was something worth trying to understand, even if the future was uncertain. One of the biggest lessons I had to learn was how to sit with uncertainty. I didn't have a clear vision of where my relationship with Sarah was going, and honestly, I still didn't know if we'd ever get back to the way things were. But I began to accept that uncertainty was a part of life. The future wasn't something I could control, and trying to predict every outcome would only keep me stuck. Instead, I decided to embrace the unknown, to trust that the next step would reveal itself when the time was right. I knew I wasn't in control of everything, but I was in control of how I reacted, how I responded, and how I took care of myself in the meantime. One night, after a long walk, I sat on the porch of my apartment and looked up at the stars. I thought about everything I had been through in the past few months, the heartbreak, the confusion, the doubts, but now I felt calm, stronger. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. I had learned to trust myself again. I had learned that I was enough, whether things worked out with Sarah or not. I had been so focused on the future before, so fixated on what I thought I should be, that I had forgotten to appreciate who I was in the present. I had finally come to understand that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And it was a journey I was ready to embrace. Was I ready to face Sarah, to confront our past and figure out what came next? Was this newfound strength enough to guide me through the next step, or would I still be held back by my fears and uncertainties? The next chapter of my life depended on how I moved forward, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to make that leap. I had to admit something to myself. The idea of trusting someone again terrified me. After everything that had happened with Sarah, I wasn't sure I was ready to let my guard down. But deep inside, I knew that in order to move forward, I had to be open to new possibilities. Love, after all, was not something I could give up on entirely. That's when I met Emily. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, no sparks, no instant connection. We met through a mutual friend at a dinner party, and we just talked. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in months: curiosity. She was easy to talk to, genuinely kind, and most importantly, she didn't rush anything. At first, our relationship moved at a snail's pace. I wasn't ready to dive in headfirst. I wasn't ready to give all of myself to someone so quickly. There were days when I'd question myself, wondering if I was even capable of fully opening up again. But Emily was patient. She respected my boundaries and allowed me to take things at my own pace. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, exploring each other's passions, quirks, and dreams. I could feel myself slowly easing into the comfort of being close to someone again, without the overwhelming pressure of perfection. With Emily, I didn't have to be anyone other than myself. But even though things were progressing, I couldn't deny the weight of my past. I was cautious around her, careful with every word, every gesture. It wasn't that I didn't trust her, it was that I didn't trust myself. How could I know if I was making the right decision? How could I know if I was just repeating the same mistakes? There were moments when my insecurities crept in, when I'd question if Emily was just a distraction, a way to fill the empty space left by Sarah. But then I'd remind myself that healing wasn't linear. There was no timeline for how quickly I should fall back into love. I had to trust the process and give myself permission to feel vulnerable again. The trust didn't come all at once. It grew slowly, one conversation at a time, one shared laugh at a time. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic moments where everything clicked. Instead, trust was built quietly in the little things. The way Emily would listen intently when I spoke, the way she would check in on me when I was having a rough day, the way she respected my need for space without making me feel guilty. Trust, I began to understand, was not just about being open and honest with each other. It was also about showing up consistently, no matter how small the actions seemed. In Emily, I began to see what a healthy relationship looked like, a partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, patience. One night, we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie in the quiet comfort of my apartment. There was nothing special about the moment, it was just another evening spent in each other's company. But something shifted inside me. I realized that I had stopped holding my breath. I had stopped worrying about whether I was making the right decision, whether Emily was going to break my heart like Sarah had. In that moment, I allowed myself to simply be. I didn't have to prove anything to myself or to her. I was no longer defined by my past. I was learning to trust again, to believe in love again, without the heavy baggage of my former relationship weighing me down. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but rather a subtle shift, a realization that I was beginning to care for Emily in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a fiery passion, but a warm, steady flame that grew stronger with each passing day. I wasn't afraid of loving her. I wasn't afraid of losing myself in someone else. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid of the future. We didn't know where our relationship would go, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to have all the answers. I had learned that sometimes, the most important thing was simply to take things one day at a time and see where it led. One evening, Emily asked me a simple question: "What are you afraid of?" I took a deep breath, unsure of how to answer. There were so many things I could say: my fear of repeating past mistakes, my fear of not being enough for her, my fear of failing again. But instead of letting those fears control me, I found the courage to speak honestly. I'm afraid of getting hurt again. But I'm also afraid of not trying. I'm afraid of living in the past forever. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the truth. And in that moment, I realized something important. Love wasn't about being fearless. It was about being willing to face your fears, step into the unknown, and trust that, no matter what, you'd be okay. With Emily by my side, I began to rebuild more than just my trust in others. I was rebuilding myself. I was learning that my past didn't define my future, and that love, when approached with patience, respect, and openness, could be something beautiful again. The healing process was long and sometimes painful, but I could see now that it had all led me to this moment. I was stronger, wiser, and more open than I had ever been. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. Would I continue down this path of healing and trust? Could I keep moving forward without being haunted by my past? And most importantly, would I find the courage to fully open my heart to Emily, and to the love we were building together? Only time would tell, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. As the months passed, I couldn't help but notice how different things were with Emily. It wasn't the kind of love I'd imagined back in the days when I was younger, full of intense passion and endless nights of deep talks. This was quieter. It wasn't about grand gestures or fireworks. It was the kind of love that felt solid and comforting, like a blanket on a cold winter night, warm, secure, and full of promise. In the past, I had always associated love with uncertainty and fear. But with Emily, it was different. She didn't make me question myself. She didn't make me feel like I was running after something elusive. Instead, I felt at peace. This wasn't the kind of love that demanded all of me. It was the kind of love that respected who I was and allowed me to be who I needed to be. It made me realize that love wasn't about perfection, it was about finding someone who accepted you, flaws and all, and grew with you in the process. I think, at some point, we all have to let go of the past. That doesn't mean forgetting it, it means choosing to stop letting it define us. With Emily, I began to understand this on a deeper level. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt a twinge of doubt, when my old insecurities crept back in. But every time those thoughts emerged, Emily would say something simple that grounded me in the present. "We're here now, Mike. That's all that matters." And that was the truth. The past was done. The hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, it was all part of who I was, but it didn't have to be my story anymore. It didn't define my future. Emily had never been a reminder of my mistakes, she had become the symbol of my second chance. Slowly, I allowed myself to be grateful for the past, because it led me to where I was now. One day, as we sat together at a park, watching the world go by, Emily turned to me and said something that caught me completely off guard. "You know, I see you, Mike. I see the man you are, who you've become, and I'm really proud of you." At that moment, something inside me shifted. It was one of those rare moments when you realize that you're not just seen on the surface, you're seen for who you truly are, flaws and all. I had spent so much time focusing on what I didn't have or what I had lost, that I hadn't noticed all the beauty I had in front of me. Emily wasn't just my partner, she was someone who truly understood me, someone who appreciated not only the man I was today but also the journey I'd been on. Something else struck me about my relationship with Emily. It wasn't complicated. We didn't try to be perfect, and we didn't feel the need to impress each other all the time. We found joy in the simplest things, sitting in silence on a lazy Sunday morning, cooking dinner together, taking walks in the park, or just watching our favorite shows. There was no pressure to be anything other than ourselves. And that, I realized, was what love should be. Simple. Comfortable. Real. In the past, I'd believed that love had to be exciting all the time, that it had to be filled with constant adventure and surprises. But now I knew better. True love wasn't about constantly chasing that high. It was about being with someone who made the ordinary feel extraordinary. I could see now how much I had changed. I was no longer the man who was consumed by fear and regret. I wasn't the man who carried the weight of past relationships on his shoulders. I was someone new, someone who had learned to love without conditions, without the need for validation. I had discovered a new version of happiness, one that wasn't dependent on external circumstances but on internal peace. And that happiness was rooted in the life I was building with Emily. We didn't have it all figured out yet, but we had something more important. We had trust, respect, and the belief that together, we could face whatever came our way. I had learned that happiness wasn't about waiting for life to give you what you want. It was about finding contentment in what you already had, and appreciating the journey you were on. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Emily reached for my hand and smiled. "I'm happy, Mike. I really am," she said softly. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in a long while, I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building a future with someone who cared deeply about me. Someone who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to be honest, and to love without expectations. I had been so focused on the past, on what had gone wrong, that I hadn't fully embraced the beauty of what was right in front of me. But now I saw it clearly. This was a love worth fighting for, a love that had the potential to last a lifetime. As I sat there with Emily, watching the night sky through the window, I felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. The future wasn't certain, nothing in life ever is. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt hopeful. I felt like the man I was meant to be, not just because of the love I had found, but because of the person I had become. I had let go of my past, rebuilt my trust, and discovered that true happiness wasn't something to be chased, it was something to be experienced in the present. I knew now that love wasn't about finding someone who could fix you. It was about finding someone who could walk alongside you, through both the light and dark moments, and still believe that together you could make it. And with Emily, I believed that we could. Looking back, I realized how far I had come. I had gone from a man crushed by heartbreak to someone who had rediscovered the joys of love, trust, and happiness. And as I looked forward to the future with Emily, I knew that the journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. Would this new chapter in Mike's life continue to be as fulfilling as he hoped? Would the lessons he had learned, about love, trust, and self-worth, continue to guide him as he walked forward into the unknown? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: with Emily by his side, he had found something far more valuable than any success or material gain, a sense of peace and contentment that made everything else seem secondary.